I think we've all heard that old Chinese saying, may you live in interesting times. And certainly right now, we are living in interesting times. I thought I would take a little departure here on the Rosie Murphy channel and take a look back in history, and particularly financial history as it intersects government intervention, government policy, all with an eye towards trying to figure out if President Trump's chances of being reelected are diminished in the midst of what may be, and in the aftermath of what may be, a financial panic in the markets. Interesting topic for sure. One of the things that I've really enjoyed, besides a close and detailed study of United States history, over the years is particularly keying down on financial history and history of markets, particularly history of markets in the United States since post-Civil War. And in the case of post-Civil War markets, we used to have the gold market, and it was tampered with people when they tried to corner markets. It was a feature of stock markets in the 1880s through the early 1900s, when insiders would conspire to game the system, get inside information, manipulate stocks, form huge pools of buying dollars. 8 or 10 extremely wealthy people might get together and form a pool and decide to take up a stock. Like Anaconda Copper was a popular one back then, and run that up to great heights. Pump the news full of good news stories about the company, paying off reporters, financial reporters, and once the frenzy had reached a peak, they would sell out their holdings, walk away, and there would often be nothing underneath the stock except the suckers there to catch it. When you look at the presidency and financial markets, they weren't really much connected until the 1930s. It may seem hard to believe, but in the Knickerbocker panic, when the Knickerbocker Trust collapsed in New York City in 1907, and allowing for the possibility of the creation of a central banker of last resort, the Federal Reserve, the United States government didn't get involved in the business in America. They left that to the governing boards of the New York Stock Exchange, the New York Curb, and the power of regulation really fell within their hands. Well, that's like the chickens running loose in the hen house, with the foxes running wild. But it was the way it was until the 1930s. You can even look in history, the Knickerbocker panic of 1907, when interest rates went through the roof because there was no lender of last resort that we have today, the Federal Reserve, with infinite capacity to keep interest rates pegged if they need to. The president had very little to say in the wake of that. President Theodore Roosevelt had very little to say in the wake of that crisis, probably because it lasted a relatively short period of time, and the economic fallout was not as severe as it might have been had there been real underlying weakness in the economy. As we move forward to 1928, in the period after Calvin Coolidge decided he was not going to run for a second term as president of the United States, it threw the field open for different people to throw their hat into the ring on the Republican side. And the one who threw his hat into the ring was Herbert Hoover, who was called the Wonder Boy. They laughed. Calvin Coolidge's cabinet used to joke that Hoover was the Wonder Boy because he could do amazing things. He fed the Belgians who were starving during World War I. He was very well known for his humanitarian endeavors. He was very wealthy too, having graduated from Stanford University and then gone to Central America and South America, and become wealthy running a mining concern and investing in a minor concern. So he was considered a very smart and shrewd guy when it came to the economy. He was also a very conservative guy. And on the tails of the prosperity, the roaring 20s, he had no problem winning the oath. I think he carried everything. I believe he carried 40 states out of 48 at that particular time. There only being 48 states in the Union. Quite a sweep. And he enjoyed a very good 1928. The stock market speculation started to run rampant. Prices and got carried away when the economy was perceived to be slightly weakening underneath of it. Farm prices had not recovered from the crash that followed World War I, and all the demands of the farm sector was definitely hurt. But the point is, Hoover was elected in a landslide of popularity. He was hailed as a great, great president. In his inaugural address, he talked about how prosperous America was, and the goal to have, the old saying, a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. And he bragged about living in a period of unprecedented prosperity for Americans. But as we know, trouble lurked around the corner in 1929 as car loadings of railroad car loadings started to decline. There was still a very good economy, but it was starting to falter as people started to default on installment purchases of radios and automobiles. The point I want to make is Hoover in 1929 was an extremely popular president. But by the time the election of 1932 came about and Franklin Roosevelt was elected, took the United States off the gold standard, closed the banks to stop a bank panic, moved to develop the NRA and other recovery programs, Hoover's popularity had totally collapsed. Why? Because he was following in the tradition of non-intervention in economic affairs. Something that had been a hallmark of the United States presidential history and congressional history really since the founding of the Republic. It was a pure capitalist system, dog eat dog, insiders, people running roughshod over any kind of regulations. So Hoover believed it would cure itself and it would fix itself. And eventually all the rottenness that was in the economy, all the bad loans would eventually be liquidated down to a very solid foundation for future growth. The ironic thing is, of course, if you're a fiscal conservative, he was probably right. But there was a big difference to being right at some future date in the 1930s and having to deal with people that an unemployment rate of 22% and people literally starving, reduced to eating dandelions and things in some sectors of our nation and in some areas of our nation. So doing nothing became the hallmark of the Hoover presidency. And as a result, and then the putting down of the bonus march in the summer of 1932, and the terrible image of Douglas MacArthur and Dwight D. Eisenhower, who were both officers in the United States Army, marching into Washington and firing upon veterans of World War I. It was an almost unbelievable sight, having to clear them out of Washington and give them the proverbial royal boot. Did nothing to enhance Hoover's popularity, for sure. So by the time election came around in November of 1928, well, you can imagine, the people were ready for change and they demanded that a man come forth that would do something. And Roosevelt was just the man. So from winning 40 out of 48 states in 1928, Hoover went on to just win 6 states in the election of 1932, and he was literally buried by the popular vote and the Electoral College. People vote their pocketbooks, okay? That's the reality of things. And now, for the first time in history of the United States, you were going to have a president who was going to be in there on the levers of the economy, doing everything he can. Remember, his mantra was just do something, try anything, and just keep trying until something works. And that was his whole philosophy. We're going to do so many things here as if we're fighting the equivalent of a war. And thank you for all the power that you have given me. Now, we know the results of what comes out of financial panics, especially today when it's ingrained into the American public that somehow government can be the savior that can reverse all of the ills of a nation. Okay, total mirror opposite of the thinking in 1928 and 1929. We have gone from zero expectations of government intervention into economic affairs in 1928, 1929 to 100% expectation of government intervention to do something, try anything, do all kinds of things. But sometimes the forces that be, they run out of ammunition, which is the place that we stand today with virtually 0% interest rates, plunging equity markets, a rampant virus that may be providing a convenient cover for the realities of a honeycombed economy underneath. It might be pretty doggone weak. Time will tell. But we know a radical change is coming in the lifestyle of many Americans over at least the balance of 2020, which arguably has been a terribly rugged year for a lot of different reasons. So what does all this mean for Trump's election? Well, he, of course, loves to berate the Federal Reserve and do something, do anything, cut rates, do something, drop helicopters full of money. Get people spending to offset. So you can expect to see things like tax holidays be suggested, or, mailing people rebate checks, which used to be done. But will it be enough? Interest rates are telling you there's something fundamentally really screwed up with the economy right now. Interest rates across the whole spectrum are below 1%. You can almost say goodbye to banking. How can banks survive when their margins are so nil, and now they're faced with the thought of having to put their money, have to pay to keep money at the Federal Reserve? It's a recipe for real disaster coming up in the world of banking. Can you say nationalized banking? Who knows? As far as Trump's reelection is concerned, I believe at this point in time, he is kind of like a deer in the headlights, caught in the headlights of this very rapidly evolving situation. It's natural. It's come on very quickly. The cover of virus is being used, maybe, as I said, as a cover story for what the realities of what may very well be an economy that's just exhausted from being on a debt diet for so many years and just engorged with debt in every direction, and a budget deficit's $1 trillion plus. What are the limits of that? Well, it could be a point, it could trigger catastrophe, and that might be the environment that faces the president as he faces election in 2020, a re-election bid. Now, some people will say, given the opponents, well, Trump could be, he could win in a walkover, and he might. But then again, there's a pretty good distance between now and November, and you never know when a wild card candidate may emerge and just upset the whole process going into the Democratic convention. And it's possible once jobs losses start to pile up, which they will, in major ways, fast and furious, unemployment will start to rise. You can believe that. People will start to get agitated. You will see Occupy Wall Street, things that would have never gotten the attention of critics about a president, President Trump, will start to be put under the magnifying glass. Having a tennis court built into the White House grounds, there's a million little angles that that the press will exploit to whip up the drumbeat of dislike for an incumbent president. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens coming up at re-election time and what shape the nation and the world is in. They may turn to Trump again. He may take an iron hand and instill people a tremendous amount of confidence. Then again, he may be exposed as somebody that really doesn't know what to do in the face of all the things that are going on in the world today. We shall see. One thing is for certain, though. It's going to be a very interesting election. and a very interesting balance of 2020. This was a long one today. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to see your comments in the comments section down below as to what you think will happen with the re-election or non-re-election of President Trump. Thanks, everybody, and a thumbs up is appreciated.